class today is on the theme of function and expression. So, if you're familiar with the Laban Bartenieff Movement System, you'll know that this is one of the principles, the kind of themes of duality that we work with, where it's not one or the other, it's one with the other slightly behind, and it keeps shifting. And so this idea of function expression being this way of looking through our movement and understanding it. I'd like to say a few things about these words because, of course, they crop up in different kinds of usages. We can think about the functionality of something, that something has a function. In order to do something, that it functions like the kettle boils the water, you know, its function is to boil the water. It's not necessarily a functional, its function isn't as a sculpture, but it might be. But there's also the functionality of something built into its design. So when we think about the functionality in movement and through the body, we might think about the shape of the joints themselves and the kind of functionality of how we understand the given architecture of the structure that we have. So that might be a way of thinking about a function to do something, for something, or the kind of the inherent functionality of the particular movement or coordination or exploration that we're doing. And then the word expression. This comes up a lot when people are talking about art, that the art is expressing something, there's something coming through the music or the movement. And we think of expression being this communication or transmission of thoughts or feelings, you know, it's got this dimension of sending out. But expression also is used in some mathematical work, so that there's, you know, the expression of like a quantity, you know, at the edge of the circle, and this particular equation expresses something very precise in the way that we don't necessarily think of when we think about the expression of a quality or a feeling, which is perhaps less precise and more kind of open. I think with function expression for me, because this is a pair of opposites that I admit I find myself very confused by often. It's not one that I relate to easily, because I think they're both very, I mean, they are very connected, but something's functionality expresses something. It expresses its functionality. And there is functionality in expression. It's very hard for me to pull them apart in this way, because they both relate to communication. They're both communicating outwardly and inwardly. There's something being communicated to myself in my own function and expression, but it also has an effect outward that I then understand in the response of others to my function or expression, which we don't get to necessarily explore in this situation because we are not in the same space, but we can still think about that sense of function expression being an inner-outer dialogue as well, just to overlap the themes and the principles here. Okay. I think there's another thought that becomes useful through this theme is a question of intention. Whether your intention is to really work on your functionality or your sort of expressive communicative possibility. So I wonder sometimes when we teach it through the LBMS system, whether there is an emphasis sometimes on expression being more towards the qualitative, the kind of effort life, this kind of expressive notion of the effort section of the whole system being the one that's about expression. I say that there's space is expressive, you know, the body itself, its connectivity is extremely expressive. So I'm not going to make that kind of taxonomy that fragments the meaning. I'd rather that you take these ideas and move them for yourself and explore how you understand these concepts, because they're concepts and we can embody them very differently on different days in different ways. So use it as something to think and move with and through rather than feel like you have to get right. I mean, this goes for all the concepts in this system, I would say, but especially today in this one. Function expression feels like it's quite messily interwoven, and maybe that's a good thing. Any questions before we do some floor-based mobilizing? Okay, great. So I'm going to take us quite systematically through some quite functional activities. Let's play with the connection between some different bony landmarks, and we'll start with the heel and the sitting bone. So the connection between heel and sits bone. You can explore this connection sitting, lying, standing. I might start sitting with some heel rocks, already sensing into these bones and their relationship. So there's a few Bartenieff Fundamental exercises that are useful for considering our heel-sits-bone connection. Heel rock is one of them, and you might want to take that onto the ground, onto your back. Arriving in your connectivity now, sensing how you sense your whole body with this particular focus on the relationship between these bones. And then we can also play with the connection of taking the heels towards and away from the sitting bones. How does this work for you today? Just slide your heel towards sitting bone and allow it to slide away. And you can also explore the thigh lifting, so the heel and the sitting bone stay in the same spatial relationship. That gap doesn't get bigger or smaller. It's simply that that whole triangular shape can float or return to the ground. So you can explore your heel sits bone connection through those three possibilities of heel rock, pre-thigh lift, and thigh lift, and then in other ways as well that you might want to do. Combinations of those, external rotation, internal rotation, simultaneous action in the lower in the legs, in the lower body. What do you need to do to increase the sensation of this connection and explore this functionality between these body parts? What does accessing this body connection give you? Or provide for you in terms of increased awareness, sensation? And if you're playing with thigh lift, you can explore the weight of the leg passively returning in the direction of gravity. Or you might explore placing your foot down. And noticing how the subtle differences of how you do the same movement can be a qualitative difference that you can sense into and experience. So that the doing communicates inwardly, as well as outwardly. You can hear the sound of your foot, maybe. Sometimes we think of the word expression to mean that something is extremely expressive, but actually something can be extremely expressive in something quite small, quite subtle. And it's maybe that I'm going to encourage you to explore. Some of the more big differences or gross differences, or some of the more sort of subtle qualitative ones. Or they're all qualitative. And so carry on in your own way. It's fine if it stays just on one spot, just lying on ground. We'll do more level changing and traveling later, so feel free to take this time to explore heel-sits-bone connection. Maybe lying or sitting. You might be sitting on a chair or on a ball. And remembering that we have the possibility of heel-sits-bone connection with a rotation through the lower body. Or even with a push of the heels. And so the connection between the bony landmarks is awakening connection of pelvic floor, psoas, through into the thighs, into the hamstrings. A lot of different muscles being considered when we bring our attention to these bones. And as ever, you may wish to work with eyes open or with eyes closed. If you've been working with eyes closed for some time, how is it to continue the same exploration with eyes open? Can you still sense in? But with a little bit more information in the visual field. Okay. Let's leave heel-sits-bone connection and pay attention to head-tail connection. A relationship between skull and sacrum. We have this possibility of a curve in the front and the back space, sideways with the spine, and a rotation through spine. And you might refind heel rock to explore head-tail connection in lying. Or you might want to go into some other movements to sense into how skull and tail can be in relationship, moving at the same time, moving one to the next. Tail leading, skull following. Skull leading, sending that message through the spine. So in whatever way you would like, taking some minutes to explore your head-tail connection with its many different possibilities. And of course, your limbs might get involved. Just that the waking up of the vertebrae and the functionality of spine is the inquiry. That all these vertebrae together might increase the range of motion that's possible in the whole spine. But for you, it might not necessarily be interesting to explore range of motion. It might be more about a sense of suppleness between the bones rather than some sort of extreme spatial arrangement. Maybe it's about where spine can inhabit in your kinesphere. Options of lying, rolling, sitting, being on all fours. And maybe given the time of day, it feels more like a warm-up. The spine, maybe you've been moving already and it feels like a continuation of some other exploration. Noticing what it is that you feel like you want to do or need to do to explore your spine and the relationship between head and tail. It doesn't have to shift you in space too much. It can be quite localized on one level. And as you're mobilizing through spine, just checking in with breath. Does an inhale or an exhale give you greater access to a sensation of this connection? Breathing into spine. How does your spine wish to be expressed or to express itself? And gently bringing your weight to your back if you're not on your back surface. And you can lie with your knees bent in the supine hook position or have them long as you wish. Let's shift our attention. We've been working through the lower body into the spine, and let's find connection between the hand and the shoulder blade. So in your mind's eye, you might want to pay attention to shoulder blades and give yourself some sensation by pressing them into the floor a little bit. Mapping their edges. And remembering how shoulder blades can float on a rib cage, connected through to the shoulder girdle into the upper arm bone and the collarbone. Give your hands a rub or even a little massage and a press through the palms. So this disc-like shape of palm being somewhat echoed in the flatter surface of the bone of the shoulder blade on its outer surface that you can sense on the floor. Begin to explore the relationship between shoulder blade and hand. And you might do that in a few different ways. You might explore a rolling of the arm, so I'm finding an internal and an external rotation through the length of my arm from the shoulder blade out to the distal end. Or you might slide arms on the ground, leading through shoulder blade, lifting, lowering on the back, or leading through the palms, swiping on the ground. And also the option of taking your hand across your body, reaching to the other hand, maybe circling that hand above you. Healing hand towards other hand, seeing where the shoulder blade joins in. And folding through the joint of the elbow, this mediation between palm and shoulder blade. You might explore having hands off the ground and lifting the shoulder blade towards the ceiling, away and towards the ground. Or finding how shoulder blades can move down towards hip sockets, involving a little bit more of the spine and the ribcage. You might get really into your fingers, including them as part of this functionality of shoulder blade and expressivity through the arms. And seeing what the spaces of the arms might be if you're still lying on your back. In your mind's eye, you might connect little finger to the tip of the shoulder blade, which you could feel with your opposite hand. Maybe draw a connection in your mind's eye from the thumb to the top of the shoulder blade. What does that change in this sensation or an image of connection between shoulder blade and the palm? It can be quite useful sometimes to just trace with your fingertips, touching little finger down the underside of the arm to the shoulder blade. Or even thumb to the sternum, taking this into a palm, shoulder blade, breastbone connection. And again, in your own way, carry on exploring palm, shoulder blade connection in different ways that you feel like. Carving the space around you. How is it to lie on the ground, on your front even, and still explore the palm-scapular relationship there? And again, your eyes might be closed or they might be open. This exploration is up to you. You might work with the fixed point of the hands on the ground to see how the shoulder blades can come towards and away from the hands there. Before we were on our backs, so the shoulder blade was a little bit more fixed. You might explore this rolling of the lower arms and see what that does up into the shoulder blades. Very nice. Arms might come away from body, they might come very close, they might cross your midline. And of course, the palm-shoulder blade connection doesn't mean ignoring rest of rib cage or spine. You might set up some chain of motion that means following through that pathway, means joining in more of you. But before we start to layer them together, let's go back to the heel sitting bone connection. And use it this time more explicitly for some different dynamics, some different qualities that might support you in level change. So what is the potential in the heel sitting bone connection where some level changes might be possible, and that you can include some different kinds of dynamics to get there or to do that? And I encourage you, if you're feeling nice and warm, hopefully, to surprise yourself a little bit. And that might mean a different tempo, maybe a different use of space. By paying attention to the relationship of these bones What new possibilities of changing your base of support can you find? Pushing out of the ground. Shifting one side to the other side, finding a relationship right to left. Bringing the sitting bones towards the heels, or heels towards the sitting bones. Couple more minutes in your own way of using this heel sits bone connection for some level changes. So that means bringing maybe pelvis up above the knees or on top of your feet, or maybe even bringing your feet above your pelvis. Or maybe a more subtle sagittal pelvic shift where pelvis goes out of floor, finding levity where the feet receive the weight of the pelvis. But you might not stay so stable or so classical in that sense of sagittal pelvic shift. Maybe you wish to explore some other possibilities here of your heel sits bone connection. And if you wanted a little bit more form with this, you can have knee drop, leg swing, coming to push to sit. Knee drop, leg swing, pushing your way up. Or you might have condensing the lower body, extending out. And I'm trying to make it really about my lower body. And that might be one side leading, the other side following. And then reconnect through heel sitting bone, heels to skull, to include head-tail connection with heel sits bone connection. And go ahead and explore some different possible qualities and level change, using head-tail connection and heel sits bone connection. And these different qualities might feel like you access some different extremes. You might find incredible slowness. Maybe you explore some more speed. Maybe you explore increasing your weight from simply sensing your weight to really pressing through the earth. Maybe there's a sense of lightness that's possible through head, tail. And then what about a sense of fluidity through spine, a sense of ongoingness through a level change, and maybe some moments of stillness, putting the brakes on, taking a pause. So functionality of heel, sits bones with head, tail. And keeping your head-tail connection, your focus, let's re-include palm scapula. So don't worry too much about heel, sits bones. Let's just find head, tail, palm, scapula. And a relationship between hands and arms becoming more part of this expression, of this exploration of a functionality of tail, head, shoulder blades, and hands. And using these connections to help change you in space, to change your level. And try and surprise yourself. And surprise might be going with momentum. Or it might be some different spatial organization of where these body parts can go. How hands can push. How spine can push. And again, checking in with breath support. You might find a full circle with the arms. This arm circle, a very easy way to tap into the possible connection between palm and shoulder blade. And maybe that circle can go in many different places. And maybe it can include also whole of the spine. One more minute. Palm, shoulder blade connection with head, tail. Exploring some level changes, maybe some traveling. And if you're already on 2 feet, go ahead and find some walking. If you're really low to the ground, take some time to eventually come to standing and eventually to walk, but don't rush. If you are already walking, and even if you're on your way up to standing, begin to include all of you, whole body. We've been playing with this heel-sits-bone connection, head, tail, hand to scapula, palm to scapula. So using walking or a transition to standing into walking as a way of connecting all of you. And allowing these connections to work together without you necessarily choosing it in a walk, just seeing what happens. And the last exploration we'll do is using these Bartenieff Fundamental principles, especially this idea of connectivity and these 3 connections that we were using, as a way of intervening for yourself. So from walking, you can start to find whatever movement you would like to find. And I encourage you to explore your kinesphere in whatever ways you like. And again, include that element of surprise. So maybe you start to go places that you normally don't go so often. And I don't want you to hurt yourself, but I'd encourage you to find some places of the space around you or some pathways in it that maybe feel a bit awkward, that actually are a bit weird and need some working out. So maybe there's some space around you that you don't normally move into, and you're curious about it, and it's weird and it's difficult. And when you find one, either it's some pathway or some particular body part going there. Notice if you can repeat it a little bit, kind of what it is that you're trying to do. Oof. And then see what happens if you engage those connectivity patterns that we were just working with. What do you need to activate to be able to find it more smoothly, more easily? For example, if I'm looking to find more of my back space in my kinesphere, if I'm really exploring the space above my head and behind me, I might think about actually engaging more through my heel sitting bone connection, as well as an arm circle, in order to get there, but not feel like it's difficult or awkward. So I'm curious about how you might identify for yourself where you can activate your connectivity even more to access the space around you more easily. And it might not be something quite so dramatic as a huge back bend. It might be simply finding more symmetry, right, left even. What connectivity can support that? And if it helps to then change it in level, like I went from quite an extensive exploration of the back space standing, I can still maybe explore that lower to the ground, or even on my front surface. What is the connectivity there that I can explore in different ways? So you see how the principle of body connectivity you can use as a kind of intervention. To make some movement easier, more familiar, smoother, more known, as opposed to unknown. So these different mobilizations that you're exploring in your kinesphere, some of it will be more familiar, and I'm inviting you to surprise yourself a little bit and find something a little bit unknown, and then see what do you have to do in your connectivity or in your qualities to find the functionality of that being somehow more known to you. And working with repetition is always useful, but not if it hurts you. So it's this idea of the body in motion with its connections as continuous, or very, very small and very subtle. So you have the tools to make this more familiar. And the tools we've been working with have been a connection of pelvis to heels, or sitting bones to heels, or a connection through spine of the head and the tail. And to include the whole wings of the arms, what they're doing, finding a connection of shoulder blade to the palms. And so something about the functionality might increase. And the way that that expresses back to yourself is only something that you can know. But maybe it would also be able to see it if I was to watch you keep doing this process. Where something is being discovered and then made more familiar. And if you've had enough of doing that on 2 feet, you might also explore it sitting or at a lower level to the ground. You can still explore something novel and surprising and unexpected low. Making sure that you're still breathing. If you feel like it's getting very serious, give yourself a shake. This is a really kind of problem-solving exploration of body movement. How you can repattern yourself without me directing what the movements are. But this idea of the unknown pathways or spaces of kinesphere is a great place to play from, where your body gets to organize differently. And if you're not on the ground already, maybe finding yourself in a heel rock. And you might bring maybe palms onto the ground, or if you'd like to explore arms above your head, that's also fine. We'll just be really clear where you're placing your arms for heel rock. Sometimes we consider heel rock just with the legs and the spine, but yeah, get deliberate about where your hands are and what that relationship of palm to shoulder blade is through heel rock now. Taking some breaths for yourself and sensing your whole body. And slow it down, slow it down. What is the smallest, smoothest heel rock possible? Changing the functionality of heel rock through changing time and scale. And in that dynamic qualitative change, what do you experience? What does it communicate to you? And then take a moment of pause on the ground. And slowly make your way back to the computer screen. And let's maybe have a conversation about any discoveries you've had, especially related to the theme of function and expression, but anything is also welcome.